To review, her literal flaws are: she wants to find people to love and give her guidance. She believes in the good of people even if they are evil. There is nothing wrong with this heavenly creature, no hardship or cross she has to bear. She's not greedy, prideful, self-centered, emotionally stunted, emotionally unstable, selfish, reckless, overconfident, naive, blinded by love, womanizing, stupid, psychopathic, self-righteous, narcissistic, inexperienced, overly ambitious, narrow-minded, morally ambiguous, or arrogant. She has no vendetta, addiction, superiority complex, bloodlust, jealousy, or lust for power. She is a person with no flaw that could be considered something to work on personally while being incredible at every activity she engages in. This, in common analysis, is known as a Mary Sue. As much as people fight the tide on this, it is exactly what Rey is.
Alright, well, a lot of people have been complaining I've been quoting Mauler but never use his voice. I'm not sure why that would matter, but let me do a kind of thematic thing to close part 2, and then I'll get into part 3. Of course, there's much more material I should go through because Mauler makes so many statements and misstatements. And I want to preempt by saying I am going to agree with him some issues in terms of the space physics. As much as he gets the bombers wrong, there are obviously all things with the Holdo maneuver and things like that that I think are worth bringing up. But not the points he raises because they can be answered, very quickly. Maybe they have special shields, etc., etc. But again, it's good to raise these legitimate points, but I think one of the key things here he brings in with Rey is just that it is really just the Mary Sue argument, and either you see it or you don't. And I have to admit, let me just preface, I do think she's a very flawed character, not in terms of quote-unquote how she's portrayed, but that the character construction does need a lot of work. And I actually thought The Last Jedi did a good job for the most part, not all of it, at least 2/3 of it, of really building the character much more strongly than in TFA, where we only get she just wants to see her parents, and that's it, and she wants to do good, and, that's way too thin as a character, so finally they do flesh it out a lot more. But I have to say, empirically, I just don't know what he's talking about, because virtually everything he says is disproven or false. Is she prideful? Yes. I mean, she's walking up to Luke Skywalker and thinking, if I hand you the lightsaber, you're going to do something for me. I would think that's prideful. She's emotionally unstable. Yeah, she is. I mean, she saw Kylo kill Han, and then suddenly, just because he says a few things, she's like, oh, maybe he's changed. So I would consider that emotionally unstable, going from this strong identification with Luke to identifying with Kylo for no reason. Selfish. Reckless. Yeah, reckless. There's actually a cut scene where she just rushes in to save the caretakers, falsely thinking they're in danger. Now, I realized by the time he did the video that he didn't know that, so that's a legitimate issue. However, she is reckless tons of time by just seeing Kylo without even at least providing some backup plan for what happens if everything goes wrong. She's also reckless to leave him alive. She could have killed him. Instead, no, just leave him alive, even if it endangers millions and millions of people. Overconfident, naive. Yeah, I mean, this is one of the first lessons that Luke and Rey have. She turns to the dark side. She doesn't know what the Force is. She thinks it's about lifting rocks. I mean, it's sort of like, did you not see these scenes? They're there in TLJ. I mean, either you're really not looking at it or you don't really want to go through the films carefully. Inexperienced. Yeah, she's inexperienced. She doesn't know how to use the blaster when she tries to fight Kylo. She gets captured. I mean, right? He uses his Force power in the forest, and she goes down. She's not able to resist it. So, yeah, she's very inexperienced in many things. Overly ambitious. I mean, she's trying to rebuild the Jedi Order after the prequels and the original trilogy. I'd say that counts as pretty ambitious. Narrow-minded. Yeah, very narrow-minded. She has a very strict binary. Either you're totally saved or you're totally evil. And that's why she thinks Kylo can be, quote, redeemed. Because, well, I still see some good in him. Well, you can still see some good in people. In obvious cases, Hitler. It doesn't disprove he's not good. It's just that you're being very naive in how you approach what is, quote, good and evil. You need to have a much broader sense of what these things mean. And arrogant. Yeah, she's pretty arrogant all the time. The way she talks for Chewie, the way she presumes to know Luke better than, everyone else, and all these other things. It's like, how would she know these things? How can she possibly think that she has the status to even question him on these issues? So yeah, she's been shown again and again to be reckless, overconfident, naive, stupid, self-righteous. And yet he can say honestly, she is a person with no flaw, could be considered something to work on personally while being incredible at every activity she engages in. Are you saying she was an Olympic swimmer while she was in the water scene? Is that what you're saying? Are you saying she's a dead shot, like every time she uses the blaster she's able to, hit the target exactly? Even the Rise of Skywalker, she can't do that. Like, she actually have limits. She loses to Kylo in the Rise of Skywalker. She loses to Kylo in the Force Awakens. At the very best, she's evenly matched when they use their force powers after Snoke is killed, but there's no indication, there's no evidence, like zero evidence she's more powerful than Kylo or more well-trained. There's no evidence of this. Now, the only issue they really ever have is that, well, she managed to beat Kylo at the end of TFA. Well, yeah, that's a legitimate issue. You can analyze this and say, okay, they're giving him too much power in that scene. That's one scene. We're talking about the totality of the character and what she shows in terms of behavior through all scenes. Now, she has a lot of flaws, and she can go through, like, they could have written her better, but this is just a complete myth. But let me close out, because he tries to juxtapose this and says Ryan is stealing the scenes from Empire Strikes Back, and I think that's a legitimate charge. However, it doesn't have the implication he thinks it does, because the obvious problem would be, well, Lucas does the same thing. Everybody in Star Wars does the same thing. Star Wars, by definition, is borrowed, stolen, or taken from various sources, and most fans don't care. They're well aware, for instance, in the very image he uses of a fighter pilot, that's taken from numerous other films. One of them is not even arguable. It's Dam Busters. Dam Busters was a 1950s film, and Lucas clearly and self-consciously takes from it. He's been very open about this. He takes from Kurosawa, he takes from Westerns, he takes from The Wizard of Oz, he takes from tons and tons of myths, Flash Gordon, you go through the list, Marvel Comics, the New Gods in DC. This is very well established. You can still say that, well, Ryan shouldn't be doing it, or when he does it, he's really, really a bad writer. That's fine, but the idea that, quote-unquote, a Star Wars director is lifting things from other films or other pieces of literature, that's been well established within the canon. That's not something that's extraordinarily out of place. So, once again, I just don't see the strong argument he's trying to mount here. It just seems to be, again, a stereotype that's very popular with some critics of Rey. And to me, it's like, listen, she has a lot of legitimate issues. Why don't you just concentrate on those legitimate issues and kind of leave behind this kind of Mary Sue nonsense? I mean, it really doesn't improve the argument. Because, listen, at the end of the day, let's say somebody does like Rey. Say, well, she's Mary Sue. The person say, yeah, okay, whatever. They'll accept it and they walk away. And it doesn't affect their assessment of the character. You're better off doing a genuine, detailed analysis of the character and say, this is what I think could be done to improve the character. But just saying, whoa, she doesn't have major flaws. And by the way, that's wrong. I've listed like 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. And that's like, well, she's not flawed in the way I want her to be flawed. Well, that's tough. That doesn't mean you get to write the character however you please. When you read a book or see a film, you have to try to at least experience the character as it's presented. If you're not giving that a fair chance, then the criticism doesn't mean anything. So, she's flawed, maybe not flawed enough, but I don't think flaws or adding flaws would help the character. It's the more basic construction that needs work. But I could go on, but I think I've done a pretty good job of refuting him. And again, using his own voice, using his own quotes. Again, I could do more. If people want me to quote him again and cite him again, I will. But I think I've quoted him enough times. But again, I understand some people are really convinced he's done something. So, I mean, that's why I chose him. He's sort of giving at least a reasonable case, but it doesn't have any empirical foundation. So, once again, Star Wars Analyzed on Mauler's Critique of Last Jedi, Part 2. I'm going to jump into Part 3. I'll do a couple more things, but yeah, I just don't see the very strong trump card argument. But if somebody could show it to me, I'd be glad to examine it. Star Wars Analyzed on Mauler and Critique of Last Jedi, Part 2. Thank you for listening. Be safe.